That's what's interesting is God does not hold back the bad stuff, what we call the bad stuff. But it's all there for a purpose and a reason. And hopefully tonight we'll be able to add to that a little bit. I don't have any graphs or pictures. I'm not real fancy with that like Eric is. So, but we're gonna start into Hezekiah. So if you want to, you can just turn to 2 Kings chapter 18. Because of our time constraints, I am not going to try to read all of it. However, all four of these chapters all go together. So if I miss something, go and do some reading and see if you can glean some more from what we're going to try to get out of here tonight. My approach is a little bit different than Eric's and Steve's and some others. I am not going to try to deal with all of the timing and and I think either Steve or Eric said something about that 2 Kings, this whole area is just kind of jumbled because they move from place to place. There's battles here and there. There's conflicts that are outside the nation of Israel, and so it gets kind of labor intensive to try to catch all that information. However, if we sit down, or if you sit down and read yourself, it is fascinating. It probably will take some time, but it's fascinating on how God watches over his people, even though last Wednesday and tonight especially, we're going to see the loss of 10 of the 12 tribes in the sense that they are captured and taken into captivity. So tonight, we're going to look at 18 through 21. God is getting ready in my mind, and I may be way off, but in my mind, God is preparing the people for captivity. He's given up on Israel. He's given up on the northern 10. I say that's not really accurate, but he has allowed their evil and their rebellion and all of those things over and over and over again. He's allowed them to be brought into captivity. As we start into the latter end of 21 and start going forward from there, we're going to see where then Judah is then taken into captivity by Babylon. We won't get there, but we're really close. And what I'd like to hopefully bring out is how God is preparing them to that. As always, I always try to talk about who is speaking. I always like to try to keep it in context, because if I don't try to keep myself there, I get way off and I get all sorts of strange and crazy ideas. So I just want to try to focus on who's speaking, why was this written? Why was Kings and why was Kings and why was Chronicles written? Why was that? For the very people that are going to be into captivity. This is their history. And so not only is it their history, and if I hope we do not do the first 20 chapters of Chronicles, because I don't know who can read all that and all those names. That might be just Oliver. He'll get to do all of those, but that's there for a purpose and a reason. It's hard for us because we don't know Hebrew names. We don't know the pronunciations. We don't know those kind of things. However, they're there for our understanding and our education. Whoops. I also want to say that we always want to try to find and look for Christ, because in Matthew or Luke, the latter part, he said to them, he is Christ. Christ is saying this. How foolish are you, and how slow to believe all of the prophets have spoken? Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter into his glory? I.e., this is God's plan. And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. So when we look at the Old Testament and we look through the Gospels and we even look through what we call the New Testament, always look for your Christ. Always look for Jesus. Always look for, why is it written? Why am I learning this? Why has he got this in front of me so that I can learn more and learn more about Christ? These scriptures, how are they relating to Christ? How many has read 18 through 21? Other than you know who. It's a tough read, isn't it? It's really kind of hard for us because we're so far away from the actual events and the actual culture and the actual situations that it's difficult for us sometimes to see that. But they still connect and they still have something to do with Christ. And trying to pick all of those things out. I'm not advocating going out there and trying to find an analogy for every single thing. That's not the point. The point is there's an overarching story here. And through Steve and Eric the last couple of weeks, and then tonight, we're going to see how this is the case. If we go to Matthew chapter 1 and we go through the list there and we see those that are a part of the lineage for Christ, we see this. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Solomon, the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam, the father of Abijah. Abijah, the father of Asa, the father of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat, the father of Jehoram. Jehoram, the father of Uzzah. Uzzah, the father of Jotham. Jotham, the father of Ahaz. Ahaz, the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah, the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh, the father of Amon, and Amon, the father of Josiah, and Josiah, the father of Jehoiah and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. So you can see here, we're right before the time of the exile to Babylon. So we're very close. This, what we read and what we talk about, is connected directly to our Savior because it is the lineage. It is from the beginning to him, and we see that. So when we see and read the Old Testament, always try to kind of keep that in your mind. We could have probably a good year just in these 4 chapters. If you don't know, which I didn't, there are parallel and nearly identical scriptures in 2 Chronicles and also in Isaiah. In fact, if you go and read Isaiah, it's very interesting where this is placed in his writings. And his writings here sound, you could almost teach these 4 chapters directly out of Isaiah. Because in a lot of places, in fact, the 2 prayers are nearly exactly the same. And so we see where God puts this several places. So with that, there is a theologian, his name is Whitcomb, early, 1924 through February 2020, not related nor directly a Church of Christ theologian, but he was very conservative, and he brought out these things for 2 Chronicles. So if you go and read some of those chapters in 2 Chronicles, you're going to find some things that are not here in 2 Kings. However, these expound on or add to, just like what we're doing with Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where Matthew says a little bit, but Mark says a lot, or vice versa. So we have these things that are not in 2 Kings. just want to bring them up now because we're going to start reading that. He opened the temple doors, which Ahaz had closed. He ordered the cleansing of the temple. He offered appropriate sacrifices. He invited Israelites to every tribe to come to Jerusalem. And then the Passover, he had the Passover delayed 1 month to allow the worshipers to become clean. Each one of those is its own story. But this shows you what Steve and Eric have gone through for these last kings, almost all of them evil, almost all of them doing really bad things. Here we have Hezekiah trying to do the right thing and believing in God. There's 3 things I'd like to bring out tonight. So like I say, I'll probably skip over a lot of things I would hope that we can go back and study. But I want to talk a little bit about this, his father David. The idea that Hezekiah trusted God. And the third one is the remnant. How many have you thought about, heard about, studied the remnant and what that means? Rex? Good. Teach a class on that, will you? When you study the remnant, you have a much greater understanding of how we are connected to God's people in this time and place, as well as our brothers and sisters before and our brothers and sisters in the future. And I think that's it. So let's go to chapter 18, and we'll start with a few verses. We'll have some, hopefully, questions, discussions, comments, and then we will, like I say, we're going to kind of skip a little bit from here to there. In the 3rd year of Hosea, son of Eli, king of Israel, Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. That's important because there are 2 kingdoms. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. Math whiz, how long is that? How old will he be when he passes? 54. Thank you, sir. His mother's name was Abihiah, or Abi, daughter of Zechariah. This is important because he has a mother of Jewish descent. As we go through, we're going to find there's ones that do not. And these next points are very telling. He did what he was right in the sight of the Lord, just as his father David had done. He removed the high places. He smashed the sacred stones and cut down the Asherah poles. He broke into pieces the bronze snake Moses had made. That's a shock, though, isn't it? For up to that time, the Israelites had been burning incense to it. So, well, no, but, that was a great thing at one point, and then we just mess it up. Verse 5, Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among the kings of Judah, either before him or after him. He held fast to the Lord and did not stop following him. He kept the commands of the Lord, the commands Lord had given Moses, and the Lord was with him. He was successful in whatever he undertook. He rebelled against the king of Assyria and did not serve him. From watchtower to fortified city, he defeated the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territory. How many see King Hezekiah as a warrior king? When you say Hezekiah, does that spring to your thoughts that he's like King David? No, it's not. However, if you go and read 2 Chronicles and Isaiah, you'll get some more background on that, and this will fill out a little bit. So I want to stop for a second. Any thoughts, comments? So I want to stop a little bit right here for Father David. His father David had done. Is David his father? Okay. Father is, by the way, father, the word for father is only 2 letters and it's an apostrophe and 2 letters. It is the first word in the Strong's Greek and Hebrew numbering system, or its definitions of these words. So father is a very, very important word. But when we read this, someone who doesn't know that father means more than one thing, it sounds like David is his father. However, earlier in the scriptures, it had told us that Ahaz was actually his father. Why is this important?
Because spiritually he was like he believed in God and followed God.
And what else? He was in the lineage. But so is Manasseh. So is some others that are not so good, right? Ahaz. Those are all in the lineage. It's important that this idea of this father it's in the Hebrew about 1,100, maybe 1,150 times in just the Hebrew, and it's in all periods, and it has several different meanings, but in this case, the noun may be used for any one of the entire line of men from whom a given individual is descended. Thus, father does not necessarily mean the man who directly sired a given individual. But David is, that's where everyone points back to, isn't it? We have several incidents, even Gentiles during the Gospels that call him son of David. Matthew chapter 1 says, son of David. So the importance here is greater than who's fighting whom, who's winning, who's losing, all of those things. It's more important that God is watching his line move forward. So verse, let's see. So this phrase, as far as Gaza and its territory, is the same thing as saying from one end of the country to the other. So he was very, very successful. These victories of Hezekiah against the Philistines doubtless occurred in the interim between the death of Sargon II and the establishment of his son, and it's Shalmaneser. Thank you, Shalmaneser. And the interval that was the period of about 4 or 5 years, but by 701 BC, Sheracham, Sennacherib, thanks, was ready to punish his rebellious vassals in the west. This and the 2 Kings 19 will deal with that threat to Jerusalem. So that's why when we start reading a little bit farther, we have a background on why is this guy coming up against his gates and just being verbally abusive to the Hebrew people. In King Hezekiah's, verse 9, 4th year, which was 7th year of Hosea, son of Elah, king of Israel, Shalmaneser, king of Syria, marched against Samaria and laid siege to it. At the end of 3 years, the Assyrians took it. So Samaria was captured in Hezekiah's 6th year, which was the 9th year of Hosea, king of Israel. The king of Assyria reported Israel to Assyria and settled them in Halal, in Gozan, on the harbor river, in the towns of the Medes. I even practiced this, and it's still not coming out right. But why? Verse 12, this is the practical piece. This is the important piece. This happened because they had not obeyed the Lord their God, but had violated his covenant, all that Moses and the servant of God commanded. Not a little bit, not once in a while, but all. They neither listened to the commands nor carried them out. This is important to understand. They weren't just kind of wayward and the cousin wouldn't kind of do it. They were neither listening nor carrying them out. So we need to understand there's a strong difference between Judah and Israel. And I think Steve brought it up last week in regards to and it's not just the Mormons, there's others that try to find these other 10 tribes somewhere and try to make a claim to those 10 tribes. We don't know where they're at. We don't know if they exist as tribes or not, but it's important to know that they were neither listening to the commands or even trying to carry them out. They had completely walked away from God, and this was their punishment. So when we say, well, God wasn't very fair there, and I've heard that, that's not true. God was being just in what he was doing at that time. So again, just to reference, almost every single word here is in Isaiah 36 and 37 from here on for the next couple of chapters. Almost every single word. This is interesting that Isaiah would have written that down. So in the 14th year of King Hezekiah's reign, he's about 39 years old. Does Sennacherib, no, I'm still not saying it right, king of Assyria, attack all the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. We know now why he is doing that. So Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent his message to the king of Assyria at Lachish, I have done wrong. Withdraw from me, and I will pay whatever you demand of me. The king of Assyria extracted from Hezekiah of Judah 300 talents, or 11 tons of silver, and 30 talents, or about 1 ton of gold, which is somewhere between $2 and $10 million. So Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the temple of the Lord and in the treasuries of the royal palace. Verse 16, at this time Hezekiah, king of Judah, stripped off the gold with which he had covered the doors and doorposts of the temple of the Lord, and gave it to the king of Assyria. Why would he do that? Why would he give them, the king of Assyria, that kind of wealth? Why would he do that? What would cause him to do that? Okay. Steve, you almost said something about the same?
Yeah. Sure.
Trying to appease him. Trying to buy him off. We have another example of another king who tried to do that. That didn't end well. This one's not going to end well. We know that. He tries to buy him off. Another thing to think about, if he's king and he's following God and all of those kind of things, is it perhaps as well to protect his people? He can't go up against this guy. This is like us standing up against Sweden. Sweden doesn't have a chance if we went to war with Sweden. So Sweden says, look, we'll take all the money out of our banks, just leave us alone. He's already taken most of the other Judah cities, Judean.
I used to say in a time frame, probably till the last, what's going to be left of Israel is going to go into captivity in about 20 years. So they got about 20 years left. And it sounds like Judah's about to go too, but actually they have over 100 years. And they've got some time before Judah goes into Israel is just about gone. They're trying to carry them off.
Pretty good. Thank you for helping me with that time a little bit. At the so this supreme commander, his chief officer, and his field commander with a large army from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem. He came up to Jerusalem and stopped at the aqueduct of the upper pool on the road to the washerman's field. They called for the king, and Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, the palace administrator, the secretary, and the recorder went out to them. And from 19 through about 35 or so, this guy rants. And he rants with some very vulgar as well as very pointed, like I say, verbal abuse towards the king. He uses some very derogative terms. Just the first couple of verses gives you the tone. This is what the great king, the king of Assyria, says. On what are you basing this confidence of yours? You say you have the counsel and the might of war, but you speak only empty words. On whom are you depending that you rebel against me? What arrogance. What absolute arrogance. And what he's gone to directly to Hezekiah's faith, hasn't he? Hezekiah has said, I'm following God, whatever God says. And this guy goes immediately to that, and it goes on and on and on. And we could spend a lot of time right there in regards to all of the insults that he throws at them. But one thing Hezekiah had said, he had told his people to remain. In verse 36, he says, the people remained silent and said nothing in reply because the king had commanded, do not answer him. Don't you think it'd be awfully hard if someone got in your face, started really, really being derogatory about you, your wife, and your dog, and not being normal, at least for me? I'd kind of be back in his face. You've insulted me. Not only have you done that, you've insulted my God. My response would be not remain silent. But why did he have his people remain silent? Why do you think? God was going to take care of it. Not to worry, we're going to, these are just words. God will take care of it for us. Chapter 19. Any thoughts, questions, concerns? Like I say, I'm just going to rabbit hop this over. So when the king Hezekiah heard this, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and went into the temple of the Lord. Here is Hezekiah's faith and his wonderful, exceeding belief in God. He doesn't start relying on his chariots. He doesn't start relying on how strong he is. He doesn't look for revenge. He's not looking for any of those things. What does he do? He goes to the temple and prays. How often when we run into bullies or situations that are extremely against us to a point of insulting our God, how many of us would go to God in prayer? Some of us, and I'm talking from a guy standpoint, that's not how you handle things, right? That's not the way the world would tell us to handle those things. So he sent the palace administrator, the secretary, and leading priests, all wearing sackcloth, to the prophet Isaiah, son of Amos. And this is where Isaiah steps in. They told him, this is what Hezekiah says, this day is a day of distress and rebuke and disgrace, as when children come to the moment of birth. and there is no strength to deliver them. It may be that the Lord your God will hear all the words of the field commander, whom his master, the king of Assyria, had sent to ridicule the living God, not ridicule me, not ridicule my people, not ridicule those things. What's important to him? He is sent to ridicule the living God, and he will rebuke him for the words the Lord your God has heard. Therefore, pray for the remnant that still survives. So this brings up the remnant. So we've seen his father David, we've seen Hezekiah trusts in God, and here we see this idea of the remnant. Hezekiah has and understands this idea that there is going to be, howbeit it's going to be a while, but there is going to be distress in the nation in that regard. And this remnant are those that are going to remain faithful. So verse 5 of chapter 19, when King Hezekiah's officials came to Isaiah, Isaiah said to them, "Tell your master, this is what the Lord says. Do not be afraid of what you have heard. Those words with which the underlings," see the twist on words there? This guy doesn't mean nothing. He's just a little guy. "This words with which the underlings of king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Listen, when he hears a certain report, I will make him want to return to his own country, and there I will have him cut down with the sword." God's got this. When we get distressed, when we have struggles, how often do we go to God or not go to God? The stronger and the more connected and understanding we have of God, the easier and more we lay into that a lot easier. We go to God a lot quicker when we know and have a firm understanding God's got this under control. All of the things that go on in this world, all of the things that seem to be distressing the church, all the things that are distressing to us individually, God's got this. All those people, they're not any bigger than God. They could all get together and God could still take care of them in his time and in his way. So verse 8, when this is interesting. When the field commander heard that the king of Assyria had left, he withdrew and found the king fighting against Libah. So now Sennacherib received the report that Kirkha, the king of Cush, was marching out to fight him. So he again sent messengers to Hezekiah with his word. "Say to Hezekiah, king of Judah, do not let the God you depend on deceive you when he says," and there's a whole dissertation again, but the first part of that is important. "Do not let the God you depend on deceive you when he says." And he has 2 or 3 points there in regards to that. What's he saying? Your God's a liar.
Well, he goes back and says, look at these other gods that we fought. Okay? And where are they today? All of their people are in subjection to the Assyrians.
There's even a spot in there where he talks to them that, well, we destroyed their gods. They were just sticks and stones. It's not quite that way, but he basically puts God in the level of carved images. And that's where he's putting, and that's what he's saying to Hezekiah. So Hezekiah prays. Hezekiah received the letter, this is verse 14, from the messengers and read it. Then he went up to the temple of the Lord and spread out before the Lord. He didn't do anything. He didn't prepare for war. He didn't go and rebuke or try to rebuttal. He went up to the temple to pray. And Hezekiah prayed to the Lord, Lord, the God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Give ear, Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, Lord, and see. Listen to the words Harkham has sent to ridicule the living God. And again, the terminology difference. Do not let the God you depend on deceive you when he says. And look at Hezekiah. Lord, the God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. He knows exactly who God is. Verse 17, it is true, Lord, that the Assyrian kings have laid waste these nations and their lands. They have thrown their gods into the fire and destroyed them, for they were not gods, but only wood and stone fashioned by human hands. Now, Lord, you are God, deliver us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, Lord, are God. This is a profound prayer. It's profound in the fact that Hezekiah knows exactly the power God has. In verse 19, now Lord our God, deliver us from his hand. It's not me. He's not praying for me. He's praying for the nation. And he understands that God has all these things so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, Lord, are God. He knows that this is very important down the road. So in verse 20, then Isaiah, son of Amos, sent a message to Hezekiah. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I have heard your prayer concerning the king of Assyria. This is the word the Lord has spoken against him. And then there's a section there where there's a prayer, and in part of that, in verse 30, is what I'd like to highlight because we just don't have the time. Once more, a remnant from the kingdom of Judah will take root below and bear fruit above. For out of Jerusalem will come a remnant, out of Mount Zion a band of survivors. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. We need to take note of this because it's this remnant that we are a part of. This remnant is not the whole nation, but it's those that believe. In fact, I like the term the NIV uses, Zion, a band of survivors. And we should see ourselves as that. We are a band of survivors. We're not a mighty nation. We don't have all sorts of worldly power, but we are a band of survivors. So verse 32, therefore this is what the Lord says concerning the king of Assyria. He will not enter this city or shoot an arrow here. He will not come before it with shield and build a siege ramp against it. By the way that he came, he will return. He will not enter this city, declares the Lord. I will defend this city and save it for my sake and for the sake of who? David, my servant. Verse 35. All this words, all this stuff going on. That night the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. So the king of Assyria broke camp and withdrew, and he returned to Nineveh and stayed there. One day while he was worshiping in the temple of his god Nisroch, his sons A and S killed him with the sword, and they escaped to the land of Erat. And Don, his son, succeeded him as king. So whose word's right? The king of Assyria or his commanding officer or God. God took care of that deal. It's interesting, some of that stuff involved in that. How did that angel do that? And by the way, it only says, and by the way, it is a singular form of the Hebrew word angel. One. And he took care of 100 and some odd thousand men. These are warriors. These are not just average guys. These are trained warriors. However and whatever that angel did, he killed them all. So in chapter 20, hopefully, in those days Hezekiah became ill and was to the point of death. The prophet Isaiah, son of Amos, went to him and said, "This is what the Lord says, put your house in order because you're going to die. You will not recover." Great. What happens? What does Hezekiah do? He does. Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord. And if I understand some of the commentaries, this is a matter of you don't want any interruptions. He wants to be by himself. He's praying in a way that he has no distractions. "Remember, Lord, how I have walked before you faithfully and with wholehearted devotion and have done what is good in your eyes." And Hezekiah wept bitterly. He didn't blame God. He didn't charge God. He didn't demand from God. He just said, "Remember, Lord, how I have walked before you faithfully." And then as Isaiah had left, was heading down out of the court, and he says, the Lord came to him and says, "Go back and tell Hezekiah, the ruler of my people, this is what the Lord, the God of your father," there's that phrase again, David, says, "I have heard your prayer and seen your tears. I will heal you." Remember, God sees you and he hears you. Don't ever forget that, because sometimes the world gets us distracted and we don't think God's listening. He is listening. "On the third day from now, you will go up to the temple of the Lord. I will add 15 years to your life, and I will deliver you and this city from the hand of the king of Assyria. I will defend this city for my sake and for the sake of my servant David." Absolutely. Then Isaiah said, "Prepare a poultice of figs." They did so and applied it to the boil, and he recovered. Has anybody heard of the poultice? Maybe I'm not pronouncing it right, of figs. Poultice, okay. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Kind of a salve?
Or a combination of herbs and kind of it's usually put in the bag and then put on the affected area.
Okay. And we use it today?
Some people in Holistic, yeah.
Okay. Here's the point. God just doesn't go, "You're healed." And we see a lot of that in the Gospels. We see a lot of different kinds of healing. But what is not unique, but what is important about this? Trusted in God, and it was a natural thing. It was already there. And they did that, and he was healed. Verse 7, he said, verse 8, Hezekiah had asked Isaiah, "What will be the sign of the Lord will heal me, and that I will go up to the temple of the Lord on the third day from now?" This is just Hezekiah's humanity. We would probably do the same thing. Well, how's this going to work? Show me how that's going to happen. Let me understand that a little bit. To me, what's important here is that God can choose to use something natural to do his work, to do his healing. It doesn't have to be flashy. It doesn't have to be big and great. It can be something that's already there. And I think sometimes we miss those kind of things that we see from God in regards to just natural stuff. That's all you got to do. Yeah, it's muddy. It's, and that's the way we are, isn't it? No, God, you don't do it that way. Yes, that's what's going to happen. So, just jumping real quick to chapter 21, we run into Manasseh, king of Judah. But wasn't his name in the list of the lineage of Christ? So, Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king. So let's do a math project real quick. So we know that Hezekiah was, where'd it go? Hezekiah was what? He was 25 years old when he became king, right? So, and then he reigned 29 years, so that's 54. Okay? So, had he died, so it had been 54, so had he died, how old would he have been without God interceding? 39. I had to write this down. I can't do it in my head. So he's 39 when he is having this, struggle with his health. How old is Manasseh? 12. Where does that place Manasseh's birth? After the healing. Correct? So what that means is, in God healing Hezekiah, Manasseh is born. Manasseh would not have been born, henceforth what would have fallen and what would have been no more. God's lineage. Right? No. Something else would have happened. What I wanted to bring out is, it's these little things God does. It's all the details that are in the scriptures that we will never be able to truly grasp. But when we see those, we can see God working even in the minutest, littlest things, especially for his lineage, especially for his plan. And so we see where Manasseh, he was a great king, right? Took right after dad. He was horrible. Eric and Steve, they went through a bunch of these guys. And we're right back to horrible, aren't we? And then, Amon, he'll turn it around. No, what did he do? He took after his dad and got worse. That's where I get to end. I don't know who has next week. But I just wanted us to see these things that are within the scriptures that we can get in strength by, we can get encouraged by. And I guess that's it. I don't see kids. Thoughts, questions, concerns? Really? Well, there's lots of stuff in here. Go read those 3 different sections together, and you can see how that works out. Thanks for the time.